I'm going to start with talking about, half of you are related to me here. I know I come from a large family. I bring that up in particular because when I was a child, my parents would take these long trips. My dad started getting a couple months off in the summer, and we would go to the West Coast. They'd get as many kids in the car as they could fit. Anybody left over had to stay home. I'm looking at you guys. So anyway, that I think became part of my lived experience of being in nature and just always wanting to sing all the facets of nature that I could. That's when I was very young. We would go to the art museum, a wow moment for me when I was a young child. And I told my parents I was going to study art in school. Most of your parents would be more concerned, kind of going into shock, right? And they'd say, don't do it. But they said, I remember my mother saying, you kids, you just do whatever you want and you always land on your feet. Because she'd already been through all the other ones and realized this is going to work, go ahead. And I only wanted to study art, and I knew that. So I started at the U of M, and because another thing about being in a large family, I realized I had to pay for college myself. I was supposed to follow whatever the dictates of the, what do they call them, advisor. So it was actually like a grad student, and he, well, you can't just take art classes. And I said, that's all I'm going to pay for. That's all I'm going to do. And he said, no, I just can't do that. And I said, oh, okay. Well, give me another one of those cards and we'll fill it out. And I just filled it out the way I wanted to, and I had all my art classes. It was great. It didn't last very long, though. Within half a year, I decided to hit the road, and I started hopping freight trains because I had to move. I've always been interested in nature, as you can tell from my paintings. I did other things when I was studying in college, but painting nature and landscapes is where I started out and ended up. In between, I did other things, but so I traveled for quite a while, off and on for about 7 years. I had finally gotten a BFA from Bemidji, Minnesota, and then a few years later, I finished my master's degree at Southern Illinois University in painting. And then I didn't know where to move exactly, and I don't know, I started showing around the country. I moved to Portland, Maine, and was showing in Minneapolis first, actually. I first showed here, and then St. Louis and Chicago, Washington, Boston, Maine, New York City. So this show is about old growth forest, a lot, in large part. It's not all. This is actually a view near my home where I live in Pennsylvania. But I've been very interested in old growth forests. I realized I always was. Every time we'd go somewhere where nature just had its own presence for all these years without the impact of human beings, humanity changing, altering, cutting down, plowing, whatever, from time immemorial. It always interested me. There's something really deeply special about those places. And I have occasionally painted them over time, but maybe it's as I'm getting older. I feel like old growth forest is really it's a topic that just really, it takes a lot to dive into because it's so complex. And there's just so much life within all those ecosystems that how do you represent that well? I started to realize though that, let's see what I actually wrote. Way off topic. If you look at some of my paintings of old growth forests, like this one and the one over there and other ones throughout, over the many years of painting, I used to paint with very thick paint, and but over time I went thicker and thinner, and then I wound up with this kind of, a lot of paint gets removed in my process. So I'll paint on many layers, scrape it off. Sometimes it gets thrown away, but it in itself is its own kind of ecosystem where things layer over each other. And sometimes there's a forest fire, metaphorically speaking, where the whole thing gets kind of trashed. I start all over. And so that's how I feel like I'm emulating the old growth forests in these works, are these layers of history. And this is where Andrea came up with the title for the show of Living History, was that these old growth forests are in themselves a living history, just the eons of life shifting over various forms from seabeds to what we see today. And that I try to get across because I just find it an intriguing subject, and I feel at home there. In fact, I was just made aware, maybe, Ellen, what was it, a couple of years ago, I was walking through our little woods, and there was a tree that had fallen over, and so I took a handsaw to it. That's how I cut down the trees there, little trees, nothing too big. But it was down, and I needed to have the path go through there, so I had to cut the log in half, and it was exhausting because it was a really dense piece of wood. I cut through it, and I thought, well, while I'm sitting here in the snow and cooling down a little bit, I'm going to count those rings because I knew every ring is a year, and they were so tight packed. It was only this big, 18 inches, the log, and I got to 300, and I couldn't read them anymore. They were so small. So it was about 300, probably fell over 20 years ago, and all of a sudden we're back in like the year I was born. And also, landscape itself, in general, is like an open book of history because there's just so much going on there. Because it is all these interactions with weather and climate and, geological conditions. And we seem to be the most tyrannical force out there today. But written large, the picture is bigger. The worlds that we shift, this actually made sense when I wrote it, but as I'm not reading it, and that's part of the problem. I don't like reading in front of groups, but I feel like it's the best way to get the idea across. So sometimes you'll get a complete sentence, and that'll be a good thing. The worlds we're shifting are themselves this longer history of, I didn't mention this, of the cooperative qualities of everything, especially in an old growth forest. Everything affects each other. And that's what I tried to paint, is this cooperation, not just the history, but the way that things cooperate between themselves. And it's not, for instance, not an antagonistic force that we can actually defeat without defeating ourselves. So battles are temporary, tyrannies and all that sort of thing are like forest fires to the forest, where it really, really can alter it greatly. But the greater history is actually what came before and the vibrant new worlds that follow. And as I'm painting these, I'm thinking about the forces of nature. I'm not trying to replicate the look of things so much as trying to make them do what nature does. I was going to talk a little bit about history, and we're at the 250th anniversary of breaking off from a perceived tyrant who, fortunately, we fought here in the States and won, so that's all good. But the history of all this, change that is abrupt and all that, but the impact that I feel I'm responding to and what I try to bring to my own work is that idea of the bigger picture of cooperation and things that aren't the reflexive obedience to a preconceived arrangement. As you look at my work, you're going to recognize that I might be into detail, but it's not the detail of a Frederick Church painting, for instance. What I'm after is the integrity of the painting itself working with the detail of paint. And so they become a little bit abstract maybe for some people, but to me it's an equivalence. And that's really what I'm after in the work. I encourage that sort of chaos, and the works can look inchoate, hinting at a greater reality that eludes our humble knowledge, because after all, it really comes down to not knowing everything as human beings. I always get this idea when I'm painting that these landscapes they're kind of grown like nature. So, or just happening on the canvas, as opposed to my trying to control it and make it look precise. So I paint to see what I need to see. And it's just kind of that simple. I want to see this place again, or I want to see these colors together. And it's just, something that I need to get out and paint on the wall. I am going to not read anymore. Yes?
I wanted to know kind of the time frame that all of these represent.
You wondered how much time this represents, all of these paintings. And they are, I think the earliest one in here was started maybe 10 years ago, but they often get repainted over time so much. Most of them are within the last year. What else can I say about that? Looking around.
Oh, right behind you. Yeah. When were they done?
Well, this one right here was done about a week before I brought it out here, but it was actually in an exhibition before this, and completely I painted most of it over. If there's an ad in this magazine that has that painting in it, and if you look closely, you'll see that I changed it since it came out in the May edition of this magazine. Yeah, it's here on this page. I'll just leave it open here. It's kind of minor changes, but there were things that I realized that sometimes knowledge gets in the way. I realized that I thought, now what was that species of tree again? And I realized that was, what was it? Maple tree. And I was painting it like more like a hemlock, which grows a lot around us. And hemlocks will have these lower branches coming out. And it wasn't really a branch. So I changed a broken branch into something a little different, which it had on it, but I neglected to do anything but follow the paint. So a lot of these, I'm just following the paint, and sometimes I correct them for some kind of scientific or understanding that I have that I don't want to throw out there as wrong. Oh, yes.
So where in your process are you looking at this actual place?
Where in the process am I looking at this actual place? And this particular tree, I had gone to I was out exploring old growth forests all around the country in the eastern half. Harder to find it there. And that one, let's see if I don't think I did a gouache for that. I will not start oil paintings outside anymore. I do little gouache paintings, and I take photographs, and I do sketches. And this one, it became its own thing after a while, but it definitely is resemblant of something that I was enamored by. Yeah. So, yes.
Have you ever thought of a book where you have the painting, the gouache, and then the final picture?
Oh.
Photograph, the gouache, and then the final.
I do now. I've got an idea. I've just got an idea. So you wondered, yeah, if I had ever done a book that had all this process. I have not, but it's a good idea. Sometimes there are books that have two of them, but sometimes photographs are kind of inadequate, misleading, and it also invites people to say, well, they got that wrong, which isn't, it's about growing the painting. So, and I have sketches that probably wouldn't they're not for presentation, basically, so.
So the small gouache, are those done on site, like Premiere, to get information that you then use in the larger work?
Yes, some are. They're kind of their own thing too. Some, they almost always get repainted in the studio because I just like painting over things. So I don't really call myself a plein air painter because most of the plein air painters I know start a painting and they're done in 2 hours. Maybe they'll touch it up a little, but I don't do that. I rework things, and they're not studies. They're almost always explorations. They're like looking for a new way, even if they're supporting a larger painting, they're looking for a new thing that I might find within that little gouache to paint, just to be, it's got to be entertaining to myself. So I'm looking for ways to not only think about a bigger painting, but it becomes its own thing. And sometimes the little gouache gets done even years later than a big painting, just because I go back and forth. And it's been characterized as kind of a conversation that I put my pieces between. So I'll start on one and it'll suggest an idea, I'll work it out there, and then that'll suggest something. It goes back and forth. Yes?
I was privileged enough to share a studio with you. And I've seen the many hours that every painting gets. And this represents maybe an eighth of the paint that you use. are my best memories.
Oh,
You
God.
made a huge landscape,
Yeah.
blue and purple. Oh, a masterpiece. I came in the next day. It was all red, green, and then purple was just one 7-inch line at the bottom.
Huh.
It was just amazing to see how you work it, how much paint you put, piles of paint on the side of works of art.
I have a mountain. Yes, I hope that picked up, but okay. I thought you were going to bring up the other story, which you know, where I was painting and the paint was so thick. Do you know where I'm going with this? This was, yeah, no, it started rolling off the canvas. I forgot about, well, okay. Yeah.
How do you determine when a painting is done?
When I can no longer paint on it. Yeah, they're rarely, yeah, they're never really done. I think Matisse, or he's said to have said that a painting is never finished. It only stops in interesting places. Oh, yes.
I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to make a couple of observations because I had a chance to really look at these paintings. I think they're beautiful. I think the whole gallery is a beautiful show here. But what I really like about your color is the bright, but it's not on. And it feels very studied, but I get the restlessness and to the process of you seeing something and connecting it. It's beautiful work in place.
Thank you. I like that characterization as being restless.
Well, there's another thing too that I see in here, and that's I thought about it and fine with this, and it's a kind of a paradox that I see is that it's intimate, and yet it's expansive. Like when I look at this a little bit of the art in it.
It's expansive, okay.
Yeah, but it's expansive. It's really intimate.
Intimate and expansive.
But it's
Okay.
expansive too. Wow. Anyway, beautiful work. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I saw Sarah had a question.
I feel like music evokes from me the early 20th century painters, or a few of them at least. And I'm wondering if you have an era in mind, or if time is of any value to your work at all, or if it's all happening in the moment.
It's pretty much all happening in the moment, but I hope you're thinking of like the group of 7 Canadians, because I was thinking, and like Durand, the French painter, Fauve, and I actually feel like I'm moving through a lot of this stuff. When I start the paintings, as you said about being restless and all, they'll start out with the colors of Andre Durand, really bright colors. And as Tim mentioned over there, where it'll be incredibly gaudy actually, but then I have to tamp it back, and sometimes I bring it forward and back again. But I feel like I go, that's early 20th century, and then sometimes I go backward to 19th century, and then it's kind of postmodern, I guess you'd say, in a way, just kind of borrowing from everywhere and trying to do something new in that. Yeah. Yes.
Talk about contrast in your work. It varies quite a bit, and particularly, say, in that painting and that painting, deep forest.
The contrast from light to dark, you're wondering about?
Value contrast, romantic contrast. It seems like you really suppress value contrast.
Yes.
Forest painting in order for them to grow.
Yes. I used to paint a lot, literally in black and white, and I shift around. So it's really interesting to me to have 2 colors that are very close in chroma, very close color, analogous colors basically, but they'll make each other look a little stronger. But it's just a kind of a playful attitude toward all that stuff. One day they'll be all black and white again, I suppose. I don't know. And you had a question.
Well, just on the time, because my wife and I are both painters too, and I've looked at your paintings for years and how much paint you have on, and the time it takes to dry. Go back over, I see layer after layer after layer after layer. Do you allow it to dry, or do you try to half dry and go back in again, or do you scrape some? You talked about scraping.
I know you're a painter yourself, so yes, that's a very good question about do I allow things to dry, or at what point do I rearrange the color? It's really all over the map because, like I said, sometimes it'll be years. I'll, fortunately get a painting back that I wanted to paint more on, and then sometimes it's a little riskier, I suppose, that you'd wind up with mud if you do it a little too soon. So there's like this sweet spot of like where it, especially if it's thicker paint, where it starts to congeal a bit, and then you can go in and do some really unpredictable things. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
You alluded to the science. Are you kind of a self-taught naturalist? Is there a author you like that writes about nature? Or did you wind up taking classes in biology? Or what's...
So you're wondering about the science behind some of the work so that it helped inform it. Yeah, actually, I studied for a while to be a naturalist because I knew that I forgot to mention this whole thing, but I started out studying art, as I said, and then I hit the road, and I thought one of the reasons I stopped was I'd read a good deal of Vincent van Gogh's letters to his brother, and I thought he wasn't crazy, but he wound up dead and with an ear cut off, and I thought, is that the future for me? The idea of knowing more about nature was deep in me, and I thought, okay, I'll do something else. I'll study to be a naturalist. So I actually pursued that for a couple of years, and so I had some background in that. I wasn't a particular science-oriented person, but environmental education was basically what I was studying to do. If there are no more questions, feel free to ask me anything afterward, and I look forward to meeting you. Hi, Karen.
What your mom said, she was really happy you landed on your feet and
Yes, she was. I'm trying to think of no, she was. I mean, I think she was intrigued by how we all just went in all kinds of directions, and so yeah, she. I think she was very proud of it. She actually died several years ago, and she had dementia at the time. And I walked her through the facility she was in, and every time we passed a bad print of a landscape, she said, "My son did that." So I guess that's your answer. Yeah.
I'm glad she told that story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks again, and all the paintings are here to look at. Thank you.